Hi, everyone. Welcome to my workshop, Styling with SASS and the Basics of BEM. I'm really excited to teach you guys some of the stuff today, and yeah, I'm hoping you'll get some really valuable stuff out of it. Okay.
All right.
I'll let you, do you have any introductory words, Matthias?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. All right. Just wanted to start thanking everyone for joining the Styling with SASS and the Basics of BEM with Laura Cooper. My name is Matthias, and I'll be the moderator of this session. If anyone has any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. Laura will be addressing them as they come up or at the end of the talk. And if you'd like to make the screen, the slides larger, you can double click them to maximize the view, and you'll still be able to see the speaker. This theme is sponsored by Lighthouse Labs, and we would like to say a huge thank you to them for their support of Startup Slam. And you can connect with them and learn more about what they do at their virtual booth anytime before 1 p.m. today. Okay, so with over 7 years of industry experience, Laura is a front-end focused developer with a special passion for CSS. In her spare time, she enjoys giving back to the tech community through various volunteer opportunities, such as instructing and mentoring for Canada Learning Code, assisting in the organizing committee for YYJ Tech Ladies, and co-hosting a monthly breakfast meetup for front-end developers. Laura?
Awesome, thank you. Like Matthias said, I'm Laura. My current role is lead web developer at LeapXD. And that's kind of a new position for me. So I'm working with a team of 2 other developers, and we build very front-end focused websites. I'm also an organizing committee member at YYJ Tech Ladies, so I've been part of it for many years and just kind of helping in the background to put on events, and we're doing a lot of initiatives at the moment behind the scenes to kind of further help grow women in the tech sector. I'm also a strategic volunteer at Canada Learning Code, so I work with some other wonderful people in the Victoria chapter here. We have quite a lot of representation here from Canada Learning Code today. Aurora Walker, who's also presenting, and Julianne Johnson are other people who actually are the chapter leads for Canada Learning Code Victoria. So I'm super excited to be here with presenting with them as well. All right, so this is an interactive workshop. So basically what we're gonna be doing is I have created a little project folder for you with some SASS files and some HTML files, and we're gonna download it, and we're gonna be using a program called Scout today to compile our SASS. Now, typically if you were in a production environment, you probably wouldn't be using Scout. You'd probably be using some sort of command line tool, but for the consistency and simplicity of today's workshop, we're gonna use Scout. So I'm gonna give you guys about 5 minutes, and what I'd like you to do is go to bit.ly/startupslamsassbem, which is on the slides there. That will take you to my GitHub repo, and then you're going to click the code button and click download zip, and then just unzip the package. Make sure you remember where you save it, because we'll need to be able to access it later. And so in there, you'll find both the index file we'll be working with and also the completed index solution file in case you get stuck, as well as the working SASS file and the solution SASS file. There's also a copy of these slides included in PDF form. So if you want to revisit any of this information for you. And then the second thing you're going to do is go to scout-app.io, scroll down to the download section, and then click on OS X or Windows, depending on your operating system. Open the downloaded file and install it. So we won't be using those 2 things right away, but I just want to make sure you guys have them set up so that when we get to that point, you'll be ready. So why don't you take about 5 minutes and do that. If anybody has any questions along the way, or if they get stuck or anything, feel free to post them in the chat, and I will monitor it and try to help you guys out. question about what CLI tools do I need. So as I mentioned, we're going to not use the command line method today just for simplicity. So you just need to download Scout from scout-app.io. Anyone who has completed steps, if you could give me like a thumbs up or something in the chat, and that way I'll know when most people are ready to move on. Anyone just joining us, we are in the process of downloading the project files and downloading a program called Scout that we're going to use to compile our SASS later. And unless anyone lets me know that they need more time, I'm going to get started again in about 2 minutes at 10:25. I see Devin from Gearbox has entered the chat. So I actually used to work with Leap, with Devin and Troy and Emily at Leap. So it's pretty cool that all of these Leap alumni are kind of getting together to give back to the community. I think that's awesome. So we're going to move on. And again, if you get behind at any point, the solutions for the activities are in there for you and everything you need in case you need to come back later, resume it, or do anything again. So why would we use SASS and BEM? Now, I'll expand a little bit more later on what both of those acronyms stand for, but SASS and BEM are kind of two separate things that can work together to really make the CSS process a lot less painful. So I don't know about you guys, but I really love CSS, but not everybody feels the same way. And I think that a lot of the reasons people find CSS frustrating is just because of how repetitive it can be, and it feels clunky to write a lot of the time. So SASS basically helps to add some additional features to CSS that make it a lot more usable and a lot more fun to use with a lot of really cool, powerful stuff. And BEM is essentially a way of naming HTML elements so that you can more easily use them in your style sheet. So the first thing is it saves time. So SASS and BEM make writing CSS a breeze. They use a predictable naming system to keep your code organized. So having organized code is really important, but the bigger a project becomes, the more important it is to have your code organized. Because you know, even if you are going to go in later and be able to try and read it later, you know, my good friend Aurora always says that you always want to write code that like future you would want to give previous you a high five. So comments are good, and having, you know, style sheets that are easy to read and broken up in a logical manner makes sense, and BEM really helps with that. Increases efficiency, so using SASS and BEM together really will reduce the amount of time that is required to create and read your style sheets. Dry code, so this is something that gets talked about a lot, which is don't repeat yourself. Nesting styles means that you can avoid writing the same class names over and over again. So if you are, you know, targeting a bunch of elements that all live within the same container, for example, in normal CSS, you would have to include the container name at the beginning of all of your rules if you want to target the ones that only exist there. With SASS and BEM, you can just nest the styles right in there so that you don't have to have so many different lines. And lastly, happy developers. So like I said, I definitely find working with CSS a lot more fun and enjoyable when I can use SASS. Just it feels like less waste of energy, and it frees up my time to do more stuff that's fun that I actually that I also enjoy. So introduction to BEM. So BEM stands for Block Element Modifier. So this refers to the process by which the class names are created. So the benefits of BEM. So the reasons for using BEM specifically are, again, easy to read and understand. So using BEM, it really helps ensure that everyone who is working on a website, either now or in the future, is using a shared language and structure to name their elements. So that means if I have to dive into somebody else's project that they built and I need to add some features or make some tweaks, it's a lot easier for me to find the specific piece of style that correlates with that element. Organized and efficient. So as I mentioned, when you're working with large production websites, like we often are at Leap, we need organized, optimized style sheets that are written as efficiently as possible to increase site load speed. So, you know, the more people start browsing websites on their devices, their mobile devices, and things like that, it's really critical that websites load quickly. And this is, you know, something that is always can be a struggle when you have websites that are really front end heavy or have lots of interactivity or things like that. Often that can add a lot of CSS, a lot of JavaScript required to make those cool things happen. So wherever you can save time and characters by writing your CSS in a smart way, by using SASS and BEM, it will really help to make a difference in that load time. And lastly, it's modular and reusable. So one of the nice things about BEM is you can kind of create these blocks with elements inside them that are independent from their container. So in this workshop, we're going to be creating a card component that could be reused in other places, for example. So it's not necessarily specific to the page layout or the template that you're using. It's more of like a modular piece. So when you're done, if you're using BEM and SASS, often you'll end up with a very clean like library of different components, and they all are organized and they can be repurposed. So the block refers to a standalone entity or object. This is usually at the top level of a component. So not necessarily the top level of a page, but like the root level of a cards component or a slider component or a header or something like that. So some examples, a block might be a logo, a menu, a header, a container, a footer, a form, list, card. Those are all good things that maybe you would find at the beginning of a block class name. The element is the part or portion of a block that is a child of the component. So generally located inside, either directly nested or could be nested a couple more levels down. So examples of this are a menu link, form input, list item, or card content, for example, which we'll be using later. The modifier is a piece of additional information about an element that might be used to alter appearance or behavior. So it might be highlighted, hidden, active, checked, fixed, or things like that that maybe just are slightly different than the default element's state. So like, for example, a highlighted button. So you'd have your button styles, and then you would have a highlight button, which might have some slightly different styles applied to it in addition. So you can see here at the bottom of my slide, I just have put some markup here. And this is just basically what the markup for the BEM style looks like. So you can see the first div is the kind of root container div that has the class of block. Inside, we have two elements that have the class of block underscore underscore element. And then the second one actually has an additional copy of the block element, and then it has dash dash modifier. So when you're using these modifier classes, you actually need to include the first part of the class twice. So you want it to inherit all of the styles of block underscore element. But then for the second one, you also want to be able to build on that using the block underscore element and then the dash dash modifier piece. So when you're naming your classes, the block names can consist of letters, digits, dashes, and it's used for the name spacing. So it's best to keep that first part of the name short. So something like block or menu or things that are usually one word tend to work the best. Basically, any element can be considered a block as long as it accepts a class name. So in this sense, it's pretty flexible in that you might have block elements inside the block, and you might have other classes with similar block element names like further down. But when you put them in your style sheet, they don't have to be included in a hierarchical way. They're kind of all treated as semantically equal. So with the element, again, element names can also consist of letters, digits, dashes, and underscores. The CSS class is formed by using the block name, which in this example is block, followed by 2 underscores, and then the element to name. Modifier names, again, consist of letters, digits, dashes, and underscores. Often you'll see the modifiers sometimes can be longer, so they might have a dash in between. And then it's basically just the block, followed by the element part of the class, and then 2 dashes, and then the name of the modifier. And again, you add them in addition to the original element class so that it inherits all of the original styles plus whatever you would like to override. Okay, so for our first activity, what I'd like you guys to do is to open the folder that you downloaded from the bit.ly link. So that's the Startup Slam project folder. You're going to open the index.html file in it. And you'll see in there is some HTML structure for a card div with some empty classes. So what I'd like you to do is, based on the comments that are in there, it kind of tells you what your class names need to be. And then once you're done, just take out the HTML comments, and then you can copy and paste the card div and paste it underneath until you have 3 cards in total. So I will do it along with you guys, and you can do this at the same time. Let's see if I can share my other screen here. I might only be able to share one screen at a time, but it should be pretty straightforward. If you open the index.html file, you'll see the first comment says cards section, and then you've got a section class equals, and then you've got card, div class equals. So essentially, those classes are going to become the BEM classes. They're not classes right now. They're just comments to tell you what those things are. But you would end up with section class is cards, div class is card. The H3 would have a class of card underscore underscore heading. The P would have a class of card underscore underscore content. The buttons, the card underscore underscore button. And the second button says highlighted card button. So that one would have the card underscore underscore button dash dash highlighted. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to kind of get to that point, and then I'll show you afterwards what that looks like. You can also reference the index-solution HTML file if you get stuck or you just want to copy and paste it. That's fine too. And if anyone has any issues at this stage, feel free to pop your questions in there and I will help you out. Once you guys are ready, feel free to let me know in the chat and I will know when we're good to move on. Just skipping ahead to the solution there. I'll give you guys another minute or two and then we'll be moving on. All right, so once you've completed that, if you open up the index file in your browser, so you can probably just drag it from wherever it lives and drop it into your browser, you will see a section of 3 cards. And let me just see, I might be able to share this. Actually, I'm just going to put this right in here. So mine looks like this. So they don't look like cards yet because we haven't added the card styles. Base styles in here already just to make it, just to give us a little bit of a head start. But you should see your index file looks like this with 3 divs that have basically all the same content. Now with this presentation, it's really not about making something beautiful at this stage. It's really just an exercise to kind of teach you how the BEM and SASS structure works. So I promise I normally make things that are much prettier than these cards will end up. slide we were on. Okay, so yeah, this is what the final HTML looks like. So you should have 3 copies of the same card div. And so we would have div class card, we've got card heading, card content, card button, and then we've got a card button that's highlighted. So right now, just adding these classes won't do anything because there's no styles applied to it yet, but we're just setting up the structure so that when we get to the SASS piece, that all of our BEM classes will be in place and it'll be nice and easy for us to style these cards. Does anyone have any questions so far about BEM? This is kind of the BEM specific section, and then after this, we'll be moving on to SASS. So if you have any BEM specific questions or anything, any questions about what we've done so far, please let me know. So we have a question, do modifier tags need to be added to the class name apart from the element name? I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but yes, so when it has the duplicate ones there, they do need to be added that way because if you just add just the card button highlighted one and not the first one, the SASS isn't going to understand that it also needs to get the styles from the original card button. Does that make sense? So the modifier part is essentially taking the original element class and then modifying it. So just adding some override styles. Any other questions before we move on to SASS? No? Okay. So, introduction to SASS. SASS is probably one of my favorite languages out there just because it's called SASS, it's awesome. It actually has the word awesome as part of its acronym. That's a real thing. So SASS stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets. So yeah, it's a pretty cool language. It's really, really powerful. We're only kind of gonna cover the basics today, but there's tons of resources. I've put some links at the end of the slide where you can learn more about SASS and all the other cool things that it can do. But because this is a short beginner workshop, we're just going to cover the basic features of it that make it super awesome, but there's also tons of other stuff that it can do. So some of the advantages of SASS are that it's flexible. So the nature of SASS makes it very flexible to meet the needs of your projects, and it allows you to organize your style rules into as many different files as needed. So this, again, just having the simple file structure for your style sheets can really help everything stay really organized and clean. Powerful, so again, in addition to being able to nest your styles, there are tons of other things that it allows you to do that we won't be able to cover today, like variables, mix-ins, functions, and a ton of other helpful tools that'll save you time and enable tons of new possibilities that wouldn't be able to be done with CSS. And lastly, it's CSS compatible. So if you need to, you can always write to regular CSS inside your SASS files. There's not really that many occasions where you need to do that, but in case you, for some reason, are copying some chunks of CSS from a library's theme and you only want to use part of it, you could just paste it right into your SASS file and just save it and it'll still work. And it'll still compile for you. So the way SASS actually works is it's called a preprocessor. So it's actually taking the SASS files and processing them and compiling them into regular CSS that the browser can read. So when the style sheets, when you're writing normal CSS, as long as your project isn't very big, your style sheets are probably going to be fine and like not too difficult to read. But the more complex and big and like difficult and challenging your project becomes, it becomes a lot harder to maintain. So SASS has a lot of features that not only make writing CSS more fun, but also just really help you a lot with saving time and having some shortcuts to some of the things that CSS makes a little bit more cumbersome. Nesting. So as I kind of mentioned before, with SASS, the biggest thing I love about it is being able to nest CSS rules within each other. So instead of having to repeat the same kind of classes over and over again, you can just nest them in a similar way to the way that HTML tags are, kind of a visual hierarchy. It's considered best practice not to nest deeper than about 3 or 4 levels when possible, just because the further you nest, it becomes a little bit less legible. But again, sometimes you just have to do it depending on how complex the thing is that you're trying to build. And partials. So SASS files can be broken up into partials. So those might correspond with pages or components or whatever structure makes sense for your project. And the partials are named with an underscore at the beginning. So in our example, we have a partial called underscore cards.scss. And so in a production environment, like at work, we would have a SASS partial file for every component we have. We would have one for the header, we would have one for the footer, and then the media queries are all contained within those partials too. So it makes it super easy if you need to add something to the header or make a change to it, you can just go to the header.scss file, and that's going to be where you're going to find the styles that you need to change. And when it compiles, it actually creates a map, a CSS map. So it loads the CSS file all minified, but when you're developing and you're looking at your site in the browser, it will actually still tell you like which styles are in which partial files, so that it's easy to kind of edit. So how do SASS and BEM actually work together? So I talked about the way that styles can be nested. So we can nest styles in such a way that they match our BEM classes. So using the classes that we just added to our HTML, we can actually nest styles in our SASS style sheet, and that uses the and character or the ampersand. So the and character represents the block part of the class in your style sheet, and then you can target the element and the modifier pieces of the classes that use the underscores and the dashes. And I'll show an example of this in a second. And then we can also have SASS partials for each block. So kind of like I just mentioned, when you have a block, you have all your block classes and all your element and modifier classes inside. And then you would have your SASS partial that is for that specific block. So it makes it really clear. So this is an example of kind of what it looks like. So with the example block classes, in CSS, it would look like the one on the left, where you have to write the word block every single time. And that's just really annoying. And it just is, it's a lot to read. It's a lot of like single lines to have to go through. So I find it much easier to view CSS in the SASS way. So with SASS, kind of like I mentioned, you start out by targeting the root of the block class, so in this case, block. And then when you want to target things inside of it, you have the ampersand character followed by your underscore underscore element. And then inside that, you can have the ampersand character again with your dash dash modifier. And again, we'll kind of be doing some of this stuff with our card divs and the classes that we added to those. Okay, so now we're going to get our project set up in Scout. It's very easy. So one of the reasons I picked Scout is because it's free and it's just super simple to use. But like I said, if you were working on a production project, you would probably have command line build tools that would take care of the SASS compiling for you, because you'd probably also be compiling JavaScript and have other libraries and stuff included. But for simplicity, we're using Scout. So you're going to open the Scout app that you downloaded, and it will prompt you to add a project. So you can either drag and drop it, or you can just navigate to it, but you're just going to select the folder that you downloaded from Git. So it'll probably be called Startup Slam SASS BEM Master, I think. And then that will populate in the style sheet directories side. So on the second screenshot here where it says style sheet directories, the first one will be, you're going to select the SCSS folder. So that's telling it that's the input folder. So that's where we want it to look for our SASS files. And then for the output folder, it's just the folder above that, so the root folder. So you want to select them both. So make sure the SCSS folder is selected for the input folder and that the folder, the root folder one level above that is selected for the output folder. So that's going to make sure that it compiles our SASS that it finds in the SASS folder, and then it puts a CSS file in the root folder, which is where our index file is going to be looking for it. The environment settings, you don't need to change. You can just leave them as is. And then basically when you're ready to compile it, you just hit the blue play button. But we're going to make our SASS changes first, and then we'll hit play and we'll see what happens. So for our second activity, you're going to open up the card.scss file. And then the styles that are in there are not currently nested. So your job is to go through that file, and you can just remove the two comments. There's CSS comments at the beginning and the end of that code block. So take those out, and then you're going to take the styles that are in there, and I would like you to nest them so that they follow the nested BEM structure. So take a few minutes to do that. And again, if you get stuck, there is the cards-solution.scss file, and you can reference that for what the structure needs to look like. I'll give you a few minutes for that. Again, feel free to let me know if you have any questions or get stuck on any of this, or if Scout's not working or anything like that. Hit that play button. This is going to set Scout to basically enable file watching. So what this means is every time you actually make a change in your SASS file and then save it, Scout's going to recognize that, and it's going to recompile everything so that your CSS file that gets created is always up to date. And once you have made the changes, you can open the index.html file in your browser if you haven't already, and you can see what those cards look like now. How's everybody doing with that? Does anyone need more time? Is anyone ready to go? You don't need to write anything in the output folder. Noha, your question there. So the Scout is actually going to write the CSS for you. So all you need to do is make sure that you make your changes in the card.scss file. And when you save it and you make sure that Scout is running, so hit the play button in Scout, it will compile your SASS to your CSS for you automatically. And again, I'll just bring back that Scout settings screen in case anyone needs it. So again, the input folder was the SCSS folder, and the output folder was the folder above that. So I'll give you guys another minute or two, and then we will take a look and see what our cards look like now. All right, just one more minute and then we'll move on unless anyone needs more time. Please let me know if you do. And you can also feel free to change the styles if you want them to look different. Mine just have some super basic styles in there. I chose some various shades of red that didn't require me to look up a hex code. And that was mostly just to match my slides. But if you want the buttons and stuff to be different colors, feel free to change them. That's totally fine. All right, so moving on here. So this is what your SASS should look like now. So you can see how we originally had everything on its own line and they were all at the same level, repeating the word card every single time. But now with nesting, we are able to just use that ampersand character to stand in for the original block name. And it allows us to have our styles really organized. So also, if I was writing this CSS for a production environment, there would probably also be various media queries in here. So with SASS, you can actually just nest a media query within your code. So I might say where it says and underscore content margin 30 pix 0. If I wanted, say, the margin to be smaller on mobile, I could write in here, right underneath that margin line, like media query max width 600 or whatever you wanted. And you could have, you end up with a bunch of different media queries kind of for every single object. And it seems cumbersome, but it makes it a lot easier when you're trying to work with mobile styles and stuff like that, because it's all in the right place. Like if you want to edit the content, like the card content, you know that all of the mobile styles are also going to be right there. And that can be really helpful too. Okay, so I don't know what your cards look like, but mine end up looking something like this. So again, they're not super pretty, and the goal of this is not about making something beautiful necessarily. It's just about giving you the tools to be able to really, just really kind of set up complex projects and complex styles and build some really cool stuff that's also maintainable and scalable. So did anyone not have their cards turn out this way? Is anyone struggling with anything? So Brandon's saying that the Scout app is particularly slow. I don't have that issue, but hopefully it won't take too long. It's a pretty small site, so hopefully it's not problematic. But again, you probably wouldn't want to use this on a production site just because it's probably not as efficient as something like a node build tool or something would be. But yeah, this card component is a really good example of kind of how BEM can be used in a modular way. Like you could have different card divs throughout your site. You could put a modifier class on the card so that it would use the original card styles and then modify them to be different in a different context. It's really powerful. A lot of the ways that we build websites at my work is it's a very modular style of design. So instead of designing individual pages that are all unique, we kind of just have like a library of different blocks that we build, and those can be kind of used on any page as needed. All right, so additional resources. And again, if I had more time, I'd love to get into a bit more of some of the SASS kind of things you can do, but I'll just talk a little bit about a couple of them. So more SASS features. So like I said, many other powerful features are included in SASS that we didn't have time to cover, such as variables, modules, mix-ins, and math operators. So things like variables are really handy. In our theme, we have basically a variables file, and that's where you can specify things like brand colors and fonts and sizes of headings and things like that. So you could create a variable that's called like color primary. The variables use a $sign. So you define what that variable equals, and then you can reuse that throughout your style sheet. To have, say you had a variable called brand color, and you wanted to reuse that variable wherever you had buttons or anything that needs to be that color. You just use the variable in place of the direct color. And the nice thing about that is if you ever decided to change your brand color, all you need to do is change it in that one spot where that variable is, and then that will get applied throughout the rest of your style sheet. So this can be really, really helpful for things like, just like fonts, if you need to change fonts easily, if you want to change anything like that. You can also use mix-ins. So a mix-in is basically a set of style rules that you can kind of reuse. So mix-ins can also have like arguments passed to them. So you might have a button mix-in and something that you pass through to say what type of button it is. And then you could use that mix-in in your style sheet wherever you want something to look like a button. So you might have the button mix-in defined in your variables, and then you might say be styling a form submit button. And instead of having to copy and paste all of the styles from the original button mix-in, you would just say include button, like the mix-in, and then it would take all those styles that are in that mix-in and just paste them right into that, that block there. Math operators are really helpful too. You can do things like, say you have something that you want it to be 100% of the width of a container, but minus 40 pixels or something. You could say width calc 100% minus 40 pixels, and SASS will like do math for you in there. That's something we also use quite a lot for font sizing. So what we do is we have like a base font size, which is usually 16 pixels, and then we have a function that essentially takes the pixel value and converts it to rems. So it might be 16 pixels on desktop, but then once you go up to 1400 pixels, the base font size increases to say 20. And that means everything that's using that like pixels to rem function, which you could use for height, font size, anything like that, everything would scale up relative to that. So you have your 16 pixel font size, and then at 1400, you have your 20 pixel font size. So if you used a function that says, I want it to convert pixels to rems, say it becomes 10 rems. And so it's always 10 rems, but on regular screens, a rem is 16 pixels, and on 1400 pixels, it's 20 pixels. So everything scales up. It's pretty cool. It's really powerful. So yeah, you can visit the sass-lang.com website to learn a lot more about what it can do. And there's plenty of tutorials out there. A recent example that I used at work is I created a custom function that generates animation keyframes. And so when you're creating custom animations, like you have to put everything in a keyframe. And I wanted to make a reusable animation where I could pass in a color and have it generate a keyframe animation for that color specifically. So I wrote a function that uses a variable, and it just uses that variable to create the animation. So when I use it, it's like include animation, and then I just put the hex code in brackets, and then it'll generate like a unique keyframe for me with like the animations I specified, but the color that I passed in. So I can reuse that same function over and over again with whatever color I want, and it'll generate a set of keyframes for each one. So that's just kind of an example of some of the cool stuff you can do with it. And yeah, with more about BEM, the BEM website is really helpful. It has a lot more details. It has some questions about specific use cases, examples, and then it has like a bunch of other links for further reading. So that's at getbem.com. And aside from both of these, there's also tons and tons of resources on the internet available for both SASS and BEM. All right, now this is kind of the like main question period. So any questions you guys have now, I'm happy to answer them. Accept comments, concerns, questions, anything you guys have for me, I'm happy to. Edvin, about your question about the previous practice, how are we supposed to make our CSS code shown in HTML? Not sure I understand the question fully. Yeah, but Edvin, if you would like to share your video and expand on your question, that's totally fine too. Yeah, if anyone's having any issues with getting the CSS to compile or output properly, there's the slides PDF in your folder, and I believe it's on slide 17. If you look closely at the screenshots there, it has what the input and output folders should look like. They might not match mine exactly, but they should be similar. And for Reed, who's saying that his CSS files are ugly, that's fine. Like I said, this is not about being pretty. I think that, you know, when you're learning new concepts and stuff like that, I think it's very important to take the idea of pretty and just throw it right out the window, because sometimes that can be the enemy of just kind of trying things out and seeing what happens when you try certain things. A lot of the experimentation you might try with SASS and CSS can end up very, very ugly or obnoxious. But yeah, it's just part of the process. All right, Tom has a question. What are some examples of mix-ins you use often in your work? Yeah, so kind of some of the stuff I talked about earlier. We've got button mix-ins. There's like mix-ins for things like H1, H2, H3, things like that. So if you had, say, a piece of text that doesn't have a heading class on it, but you want it to look like a heading, you can use a mix-in that kind of applies all the same styles that it would get as if it were a heading. Yeah, don't use mix-ins as much for some of the stuff that we're doing. We use a ton of variables. We have variables for like every color that we use, all the different font styles and things like that. But yeah, mix-ins I use a lot for things like animations or yeah, anything that you'd want to reuse in a lot of places and not have to copy and paste all that CSS again. Awesome. Does anyone have any more questions? You can ask me anything. Brandon, if your cards are within each other, just check your HTML. You might be missing a closing div somewhere. Worst case scenario, you could copy and paste all the stuff in the index solution and just put it right in there. But depending on what code editor you're using, it may or may not show you that you're missing a closing div tag. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Some of them also have the ability to like open and close the div in the editor so that you can kind of see when they're all closed. If there's like an extra end div or one missing, then like it'll kind of be more obvious. No problem. Happens to me all the time. All right, with that, I just want to thank you all again for taking the time out of your day to participate in Startup Slam and to come and listen to my workshop. It really means a lot to me that there are people out there that are interested in SASS and BEM. So yeah, I'm somebody who is super interested in helping people, you know, get experience and get opportunities in the community. So if there's ever anything I can help you with, if you're, you know, looking for your first job or you have questions about what it's like to be a developer or any like local tech companies or anything, feel free to reach out. I can be found on both of the YYJ Tech and the YYJ Tech Ladies Slack communities that Aileen mentioned earlier, as well as on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Laura Cooper 1. Yeah, so feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear any other questions that you might have as you start trying out SASS and BEM, any issues you encounter. I'd be happy to try and help. Or if you have any feedback for me on this presentation, I'd love to hear that as well, because I really appreciate your time and energy.